Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our Immigration and Global Mobility webinar today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sue Kakardia, partner here at Forvis Mazars. I look after immigration, global mobility, employment taxes, tax dispute resolution, and employee rewards. I think everyone knows that the UK immigration landscape is constantly evolving and new rules and changes impacting individuals and businesses. And as part of April 2025, several key updates have been introduced across various routes and immigration policies. And these developments carry significant implications for those seeking to live, work or study in the UK. We've seen fee increases, updates to the global talent visa, changes to the skilled worker route. This webinar today will provide you with an overview of the latest changes in immigration, offering insights on what's new, what's changed and what you need to know moving forward. Whether you're an employer, a potential applicant, or simply looking to stay informed, hopefully we'll answer all your questions today. There is a clear synergy between immigration and global mobility, and we will also update you on the changes to taxation of UK inbounds, short-term business visitors, and non-resident director reporting. We do have a packed agenda for you. I am delighted to welcome Lee Graham, Aaron Walton, and Andrew Edgar from Home Office, and I will let each of them tell you which areas they are responsible for. You will also hear from Michelle Askew, a director in our immigration team, and Robin Bailey, who is a director in our global mobility team. You will have the opportunity to ask questions after Lee, Aaron, and Andrew have spoken, and again at the end of the webinar, but please feel free also to pop questions in the chat and we'll answer those either as we go along or Lee, Aaron, and Andrew will pick those up. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Lee. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Sue. Lovely introduction and good afternoon. Yeah, it is afternoon. I have to check then. But good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully it's nice and warm and sunny where you are. Enjoy it while it lasts. No, thank you for inviting us to your webinar today, and we will try and give you as much information as we can, and of course answer some of your questions. And what we can't cover today, we'll follow up with you as well. We're going to cover electronic travel authorization today, which we introduced last year, and Aaron will talk to you a bit more about that and where we're going with that. And of course, that's digitizing our border. We'll talk to you as well about e-visas, or I should say, about e-visas and how that's changing, how people prove their immigration status. And then we'll try and give some time as well to look at sponsorship, particularly sponsorship compliance, and we have Andrew Edgar, who works in that area and can talk to you a little bit about some of the work that him and his team are doing. First question I always get asked is about the slides. We're not going to share the slides today, but we will follow up. And I think this recording will be available. Also, we will, if there's any questions we can't answer, we will follow up with them as well. So you'll hopefully have lots of opportunity to hear the questions and receive some answers. So anyway, Aaron, let's start with ETAs, and I'll bring you in. And yeah, if you can give us a quick update here, Aaron, of where we are with electronic travel authorization.
Will do. Thanks, Lee. So my name is Aaron Walton. I work with Lee Graham in what is the Future Border and Immigration Systems Program within the Home Office. A lot of words, but essentially it's the program that's responsible for the delivery of both ETAs and e-visas. So I will take you through the slides on ETA. So next slide, please, Lee. So the introduction of ETA is part of this whole idea of a permission to travel. It essentially means that anybody wishing to come to the UK will need some sort of permission before they do. This isn't something new. This is something that's been in train for a while, but the introduction of the ETA sort of expands permission to travel. So as you can see, there's sort of three kind of groups of people here. So British and Irish citizens, there's going to be no change in how they sort of present themselves at the border. They will still need a valid British or Irish passport to come into the UK. Nothing's changing about that. The second group is those who already have some sort of permission here in the UK, so a resident. So anybody who has EU settlement status, indefinite leave to remain. Anybody who used to have one of those biometric residence permits. Lee will talk to you about e-visas later, so I won't talk much about that. But anybody who has some sort of residency, again, nothing's changing in that respect. It's now just digital rather than sort of the tangible products you had before. But there'll be nothing new that you need to do in that space. Where it will change is for those group of people who ordinarily do not require a visa to come to the UK and aren't already resident in the UK. So if you think a Canadian visitor, they ordinarily do not require a visa and they don't have any residency here in the UK. As a visitor, they will need an electronic travel authorization. So it's that group who it's going to change for. Next slide, please. So I'll talk more about the electronic travel authorization. So it's a permission to travel to or transit landside through the UK. So it is something that's required to get on the plane, the train, or the boat to come to the UK. Once you arrive in the UK, you go through the same border processes you do now. So if you need to go through an immigration officer, you'll continue to do that. If you need to use an e-gate, you will also do that also. There is no requirement for people to check ETAs once they've arrived at their destination. So if somebody's coming to you for a business meeting, there is no need for that business owner or even the person here in the UK meeting that person to check the validity of their ETA or whether their ETA has expired. You can assume that if that person has made it to you, they have a valid ETA and they were able to get through the immigration process. So again, it's the holder of the ETA that is responsible for making sure that their ETA is valid and also that they have one. It's valid for 2 years until the expiry date of the passport, whichever comes sooner, and it can be used for multiple journeys in the UK during that period. Yes, it lasts for 2 years, but it doesn't mean you can be a visitor for 2 years. You still need to engage with the immigration framework that exists now. Anything that's a short visit for the UK is sort of 6 months or less. So again, the person holding the ETA just needs to make sure that they are complying with immigration law. The application process, which I'll touch on momentarily, is light touch and online. There was a reference to fees earlier, so some of you may have been aware that the ETA was originally £10 per person, but since the 9th of April, it's now £16 per person, but the application process is all online. It's a digital permission, so it's linked to your passport. So once you have an ETA, it's linked to the passport. There's no need to print off any tangible evidence for it. You can if you want to, but again, it's an online product. It's digitally linked to the passport, so there's no need to produce any evidence of it. And the reason why we're introducing this is primarily to strengthen the security of the border. We want to know more about people before they arrive. Lee, if you can move on to the next slide. The other part of this also is we aren't the only ones taking this approach to border security. So you've got US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. They've all got their own ETAs. Some of you may be familiar that the EU is due to release their own sort of ETIAS scheme soon. We don't have a date for that, but we do think it may be next year. But also part of our engagement, we've spoken to other countries as well. And as you can see, countries like Japan, Israel, Thailand, and South Africa are thinking of doing the exact same thing as well. So again, we're just pretty much following train, and this is really what what people are taking in terms of their approach to border security. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about who does and who does not require an ETA. So some of this is repetition, but I do think it's really useful. So it's aimed at those people who are visiting or transiting landside who currently do not require a visa for short stays. So if I break that down slightly, visiting is what you expect. Visiting friends and family, business trips, studying as a visitor, attending events, anything that a visitor would do. It also extends to those coming here on the creative worker concession and those engaging in prepaid employment as well. The transiting landside, anybody who's been following the ETA journey would have known at one point that both variations of transiting were included in the ETA, but since I think it was February or March this year, they have now been split. So it only counts if people are transiting landside. So that's when you have to either go through border control, go through an e-gate to collect your luggage, to potentially check in for another flight to go to your final destination. In that method of travel, if you need to do that variation of transit in landside, you will need an ETA for that type of travel. For those who it doesn't apply for, while I'm still talking about transit, I'll talk about airside transit as well. So airside transit is when you may arrive at Heathrow, but your bags are going through to your final destination and there's no need for you to go through immigration control. That's called transiting airside. And there are only 2 airports within the UK that you can transit airside. That's Heathrow and Manchester. So if you are transiting airside, you will not need an ETA. And if you're not quite sure whether you're transiting landside or airside, your airline can advise you on what you need to do and if you are transiting either landside or airside. So I'll continue on with who does not require an ETA. So again, goes back to the first slide I started speaking about. If you ordinarily require a visa, so off the top of my head, Indian nationals require a visa to visit the UK. That's not changing. They don't need an ETA in addition to having a visa. And that's the same if you've already got some sort of permission to come to the UK, whether you're work or studying as well. British or Irish passport holders do not need an ETA. And while I'm on that, I'll speak about dual British Irish citizens. So if somebody is a British and American citizen, I know that if they are living in America or visiting America, they will need to come in and out on their American passport, which is fine. We would advise that people who are dual citizens, they carry both passports. So therefore, when you are at the gate, you're being asked about an ETA as you present your American passport. You can then have your British passport on you and then evidence that you do not need an ETA due to your British citizenship. If you don't have a British passport, you can get something which is called the Certificate of Entitlement of Right of Abode, which you can put in this example in your American passport, so you can evidence once again that you do not require an ETA. There's also an exemption for those who are legally resident in Ireland who ordinarily do not require a visa to travel to the UK. So the American national who resides in Ireland, if they're traveling around the common travel area, won't require an ETA. Those who are exempt from immigration controls, so if you think heads of state, serving government ministers, accredited diplomats, they won't need one also. Also, those who are British Overseas Territory citizens, please don't ask me who they are because I can never remember off the top of my head. But those citizens will not require an ETA, and also British national overseas passport holders and visa holders will not require an ETA. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about the passenger process. So as I mentioned before, it's a digital product. Everything is done online. There is no paper-based application. Two ways of doing it are the ETA app and also gov.uk. You can also use both to help people apply for their application. So everybody's going to need an ETA regardless of age. So parents and guardians can support their children to apply for an ETA. With the app, that person needs to be in the room with you because the app asks for a liveness check there and then. But with gov.uk, if that person can send you a picture of their passport biodata page and also a picture of themselves, you can complete the application on their behalf. The application is quick and simple. It asks for a lot of biographic and biometric data. If you're doing it with the app, a lot of the important information is obtained when you take a picture. So therefore, there's a less chance of you making a mistake. In terms of the questions it asks, it's primarily about criminality, counter-terrorism, things you would expect on an application like this. Once you've completed your application and pay the £16 with any sort of major debit or credit card, as well as Apple Pay or Google Pay, everybody goes through a security check. If there is no issues at the security check, you will get what is called an automated grant. Most people, and when I say most, a high percentage of people, more than 90%, are getting an automated grant, sometimes within minutes, sometimes within half an hour. That will essentially say that there are no issues, your ETA is granted, you'll get an email confirming that you have your ETA and that you are now free to travel to the UK. We do advise, though, that even though people are getting quick grants, that you apply for an ETA at least 3 working days in advance. The reason being that if there are any issues at the security stage, your application then gets flagged to a caseworker who has 3 days to turn your application around. So even though most people are getting them quite quick and it does allow for spontaneous travel, we still do advise that people apply as soon as they know they are coming to the UK. Because the other side of this is you can be refused an ETA. If you're refused an ETA, you'll get a confirmation email. It will give you sort of a short, very brief reason as to why you've been refused, and then it will advise you to apply for a visit visa. So even though per se a Australian national does not require a visa to come to the UK, that is still an option for them. And again, it goes back to this idea that everybody's going to need some sort of permission before they arrive in the UK. So if the Australian national can't get their ETA, if they still need or want to come to the UK, they need to go and think about getting a visit visa. Next slide, please. So as I made sort of references before, it will impact nationals from all these countries. So there's about 90 countries on here in terms of who their nationals will require an ETA. So I'm hoping most of you may be aware that we rolled it out in phases. We started with Qatar sort of 2023, the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries early last year. We then rolled out to the rest of the world, so sort of countries within Africa, America, Asia, and Oceania, the beginning of this year. And we just about a month ago, just under a month ago, we then rolled out to nationals of the EU. So we have now sort of completed the rollout in terms of how it's going. We're seeing that compliance is really good at the moment, which is great. We haven't yet moved to enforcement, so ETAs have not necessarily been strictly enforced. So until we announce an enforcement date and that enforcement date comes into place, if you are applying for an ETA, you're waiting a decision, or you arrive at the airport and you forget, we still really encourage people to apply and engage with the process. However, at this point in time, people won't be sort of prevented from boarding an airplane or the boat or international rail if they don't have an ETA. That approach will continue until we have an enforcement date. But I just really want to push that we want people to engage with it because the enforcement date can come soon. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So I know that's a lot of information to take on. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not. But the reason we do things like this is because we just want people to make sure that they communicate these changes to their staff, their stakeholders, their customers, their friends and family, just letting anybody know that traveling to the UK has changed and will continue to change. I'm not expecting you to remember everything that I've said, so there are resources that are available. One thing that I can share with the team after this is the ETA Partner Pack, which can be used to put information on websites. It's made to be shared externally, so share it with your colleagues and your customers, as I've mentioned before. There's a really good, useful gov.uk webpage about ETAs. It's got information on how you can apply for an ETA. It's got information about the policy that sits behind it as well, so it's really useful as well. The last thing I will say about this is many people have already started applying for their ETAs. That's great. We are aware that there are third-party websites that are affiliated with airlines that are sort of allowing people to apply for an ETA. Most of these websites are legitimate, and people are getting their ETAs from them. However, they do charge an exorbitant fee. So we are aware that people are being charged sort of £100 for what is a £16 ETA. So we really ask people to direct any customers, any people you speak to the gov.uk webpage where you can download the app, or apply on gov.uk. So I will stop there. Lee, I believe I'm handing over to you now on all things e-visa.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And Aaron, we did get a question before the session. It might be worth you quickly covering off now in relation to people thinking that ETA is more than what it is in terms of its use. I don't know, you want to just quickly cover that off, Aaron, just in terms of just to reiterate the point really that ETA, it doesn't act as anything else other than your permission to travel. Yeah.
So ETA isn't a visa product. As Lee said, it's a permission to travel. It's the thing that's required to get on the plane, train, or boat. When you arrive at the UK, the same immigration processes do apply. So even if you have an ETA, you can still be refused entry into the UK. So it doesn't change the immigration process, it just adds to it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying as an employer, for example, you don't need to be checking anyone has an ETA. You know, you can assume once they're in the UK.
Yeah, so as I made reference, if you are having a meeting with somebody who requires an ETA, it is not for you as the person they are meeting or an employer or whoever it might be to check that that person has that ETA. You have to make an assumption that if that person is standing in front of you, that they had their ETA, they were allowed on the flight, it allowed them to get through immigration, and immigration were happy to allow them to enter. There is no requirement for anybody to check an ETA in country once that person has arrived.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Aaron. Worth covering. And do check the Q&A in case there's any other questions. You might be able to cover them off as well. All right, folks. Let's move on to e-visas then. So, again, we've been working on e-visas now for quite a long time, and I think I spoke to this group a bit before, but really wanted to give you a quick update as to where we're at and you know, the kind of next stages of this process. So last year, you will remember, certainly for the early part of the year, we were writing out to people whose email addresses we had to ask them to create their account, and it was through that account creation process that they're able to access their e-visas. We did that for a few months, and then in August we allowed the public to anyone who needs to create an account to do so. And it's fair to say that we've had really good uptake. The immigration minister in February did set out that over 4 million people have completed this now. We do have a few 100,000 to go. I think the minister said 600,000 to go, but that was of course in February. We still have, I say, some people who haven't taken action yet, and I guess my plea here is, as an organisation, if you still have some staff who maybe haven't created an account yet, they can still do so. And even with the expired BRP card, because of course all BRP cards expired at the end of last year, they can still use that to create their account. We did stop producing BRPs altogether in October for the vast majority of people, and we haven't produced BRP since. It's worth saying that obviously for those that we did stop from the point that we did stop producing BRPs, people would create their accounts and use their e-visa instead. So of course that means that there's lots of people already using e-visas. And especially for some of our new applicants who are obtaining visas as well. We are aware, of course, that for lots of people, the BRP cards and BRC cards were ending at the end of December last year. Quite clearly, though, as part of that, we were also clear in saying that that didn't mean their immigration status was expiring. And that's really important because we're not changing anything about people's immigration status. We're maybe changing how people prove their status, and you will know this for lots of people that you, I'm sure, do your right to work checks with, where you will obtain a share code and their date of birth and conduct that check online rather than checking a physical document. So you'll be well versed on that, and I'll cover off a bit more on that shortly. It's worth also saying for expired BRPs as well, we did allow them to be used for travel. Initially, the government set out until the end of March, but fairly recently has extended that to the 1st of June. So do ignore that date on the slide there. It's actually the 1st of June. So BRP cards can still be used for travel permission. Once we move past the 1st of June, though, we won't be accepting expired BRP cards for that purpose. Vignettes, I'm sure you'll be interested in. It's worth saying that we will be decommissioning vignettes for quite a number of people this year and into next. Certainly those that receive a 90-day vignette for work or study or one of our some of our immigration routes, that 90-day vignette will effectively fall away, and we'll come back out to you when we have more information and a date for that to happen. But ultimately, it will change the customer journey. People currently need to go to a VAC, enroll biometrics overseas. They will later return to that VAC to collect their passport with a vignette in. Of course, once we stop producing vignettes, we will take out that duplicate journey, and they'll only need to go once to the visa application centre. So again, that's a positive. I think the key message, though, that you will hear, and it's worth just remembering, is that if they haven't got a vignette, people really need to make sure that they've created their account before they travel to the UK, check that their information is correct. But there'll be further information to come out on that in due course. But I just wanted to really just make that point. The behaviour needs to change. People need to, if they're coming here on a work visa, for example, they need to be creating their account before they travel, ideally, and check their information is correct, and of course then using their e-visa, and certainly at the border with all the airlines, as an example, we do share data with them, and they will be able to check that moving forward. But again, it's worth just making them points. That's how the customer behaviour will change. Just to cover off a few more things, of course, when I said BRP cards, it also includes BRC cards. For those that have maybe a wetting stamp in their passport, so maybe they received indefinitely to enter or indefinitely to remain, quite often many years ago, they don't have any e-visa at this stage. The reason being we need to capture their biometrics. So they do have a way of doing that, though, to apply for a product called No Time Limit, which is a free application, and they can, as part of that application, which has been streamlined as well and is a lot simpler, they will get the ability to create their account and access their e-visa following the completion of that application. And again, I do get asked quite a lot about, well, can they still use their stamp in their passport? Yes, I think the minister's been clear there that people can still use the stamp in their passport, especially for travel. There are some nuanced guidance for right to work checks for people who have stamps in their passports and the relationship to the employer checking service. But really, our message is clear: to receive the benefits of e-visas and have a digital record. That is something that we are very keen for people to do. So again, you may have staff who, they've been with your organisation for a long time. You don't need to be checking their right to work again because they're here indefinitely. But as I say, it might be worth encouraging them to apply for no time limits. That way, they will enjoy the benefits of e-visas, and that becomes more important in a travel sense. Of course, if the airline can check people's status using in a digital fashion, they don't need to be asking for physical evidence. You can imagine in that scenario it's going to be quicker. So yeah, that would be my advice there. Just in terms of right to work checks, I think the key takeaway here for you, and I will come back to a couple of your questions at the end. Quite clearly, and has been the case for a long time, even with the BRP, you still had to request a share code. That's because the right to work services do allow people to generate a share code even without an account. They can do that with their BRP, and they can even do that still with their expired BRP. So you can still, and you should be asking for share codes in majority of cases. I think the questions we have had though are from employers who were concerned that they were having to do repeated checks, and the advice really is clear: repeat checks not needed until the employer's immigration status is due to expire, not when the BRP card expired. So if you have an employee that has indefinitely to remain, you've already done that check, kept your records. You don't need to be thinking about doing any follow-up check in that scenario. But what I will also say, and there is lots of checklists online and advice for you if you are unsure. It really doesn't take long for someone to give you a share code and for you to use that with their date of birth and check their right to work. So yeah, worth bearing that in mind. A couple of important points to raise, and I will move us on. For travel, there is a really important point here for people to, when they're traveling, they don't have an ETA, so that's not applicable to them, but they have a visa. Their e-visa acts as their way of traveling. However, they need to make sure that their travel document is linked to that account. So the Update My Details service is the way of people updating online, and again, it's free to tell us about their new travel document. That is, as I say, that is all online. We made a change recently as well for people who maybe have changed their name. They can also, for quite a lot of people now, they can also do that online. The important bit here is though, check your e-visa is correct. Check your travel document is linked. I've spoke to you about expired BRPs, and up to the 1st of June, as I say, they'll still be allowed, but after that, it will really be making sure passports are linked and the carrier can use that linked passport document number to check status. We have had some people report errors on their e-visas, and the advice really here is if people have information on their e-visa is wrong, they can and should report that online. There is a link to doing that, reporting that online. They can speak to our resolution centre as well if they need to, but also I would recommend that they do that online. So sorry, I need to move rooms as I'm speaking. And then finally, just to point out as well, there is still a wide range of resources available, so people can use that. Still, there is grant-funded organisations if people need support to that level, but there's also lots of materials, partner packs, etc., which people can also use. But again, we will follow up with you and share all this information with you afterwards. In terms of staying up to date, I would recommend that you subscribe to the eVisa page online. That will be updated shortly to talk about vignettes decommissioning. So again, it's worth you dropping to the bottom of that eVisa page and subscribing, and you will get email updates. But I'm sure you will get updates anyway, you know, from these type of events as well. So I'm gonna just stop there, and I've rattled through that really quickly. Have we had any questions on ETAs and e-visas, guys, or should we move across to Andy? I think we can move across.
There is one question, Lee, on the chat that maybe you can respond. So for the e-visa, what is the requirement for people with settled status?
Is that all the questions? Is that all it says?
Yes, it's on the QIN.
So in terms of requirement, they have settled status. I don't know if this relates to a right to work check. If you know that they are already settled here and have indefinite leave to remain here, you don't need to be checking that again. As long as you've done that check in accordance with the guidance at the time you completed the check and you've kept accurate records, then you're compliant from a right to work perspective. So I hope that answered that question for that person. Do come in if you need more. I will just quickly say as well that and we did have a question about contractors and those that you maybe employ via a third party and who needs to conduct the right to work check. So at present, for any businesses that are businesses that are not legally required to carry out right to work checks on individuals who they don't directly employ. So that's the current guidance. If you check the Home Office guidance, it just set out the public policy reasons why organisations should ensure the right to work checks are completed on those individuals they engage to provide work for. So the services or the third party that you're referring to, they should be conducting that right to work check before you use them. There will be a change in the legislation though, and that will be amended next year. There is information online about this, in which we will extend the scope of employers who are required to carry out right to work checks on their employees or other working arrangements. So the other working arrangements is the key bit here. So next year, when we implement this, employers will be required to carry out right to work checks, and that will include those who I've just mentioned before in terms of subcontracting, third parties, etc. So of course, we will come back out to you with more information on this in due course. But certainly, the right to work guidance is where you can check all this information as well. So I'm going to stop there. Andrew, thank you for joining us as well. And if we can move on to sponsorship compliance, we've had some questions from some of our stakeholders on the call about compliant visits and the like. So I'll let you talk now, Andy.
Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Andy Edgar. I'm a compliance lead for sponsorship in UKVI. So I'll kind of give some background on what compliance is and how it sort of is structured and functions at the moment, and then I'll sort of go through the questions, and there's about 4 or 5, but they should kind of think quite naturally expand on some of the other points. So my teams, where we sit overall is kind of within sponsored work. So we cover skilled work and kind of all the other temporary works that there are, you know, in the system that use sponsorship. And alongside that, we've got the kind of like application teams, the pre-license teams, as we call them, who decide on who gets the sponsor license. Alongside that, we've got the kind of visa teams where it starts to be more about the people than the companies, and then compliance sits alongside both those functions. And obviously, our focus is on the UK-based sponsoring organisation. So my teams are essentially a tasking and allocation team. So they will take referrals from other government departments, from sector bodies, from migrant workers themselves, anybody who goes into reporting immigration crime, where there's a link to a sponsoring company, that will come through to my teams. We get referrals from the visa side. So if we've got issues that are showing up at Border Force or within the visa application process, where we see sponsors who are making high demands for cost usage, which don't balance with what they told us when they applied for a license, or the numbers that they're asking for seem to be kind of out of kilter with what we'd expect from a sponsor of that side. We also take safeguarding, modern slavery referrals, again, internally and externally. And all this feeds into basically what is in effect a kind of intelligence and information processing team, who will then pull the data together on that sponsor, conduct a desk-based investigation, and from that the decision is either to then go on to do we have straight to revocation grounds, do we need to immediately suspend because the sponsor poses a risk to the immigration control, do we need to organise a visit, and if so, does it need to be a physical or a digital visit? And that's kind of decided on is in terms of looking at the potential breach of the sponsorship guidance that we can see evidence of, what the sponsor history is, and kind of what the sponsor behaviour has been with us, you know, in the past. Have we had adverse traces on that sponsor before? Have they generally been, you know, a compliant sponsor? How long have they been on the register, and what sector are they operating in? Basically, to just give us an idea of the sort of profile and risk that sponsor poses. So that's the kind of intelligence aspect. The question a lot of is like, how do we decide who we look at and who not? And that's basically, that is around that kind of intelligence. And what's the information intelligence on that sponsor, and what is the kind of risk that sponsor poses to the kind of integrity of the system, the immigration control, and any workers that they might get or have. And also, what is the risk posed to those workers, I think, more importantly. From that tasking team, which is only around about 15, 16 people, they will then either forward that to a caseworking team who will do this straight to suspend or straight to revokes, or they will pass it forward for a visit. Now, that initial kind of, if you like, non-complex caseworking team, again, that's about 20 staff. If it requires a visit, then there'll be a visit pack put together, and that will go forward to the compliance visit team, which at the moment are stood at around 50, 60 compliance officers, and that's nationally. So again, it's not obviously a finite resource, and that's why we look at kind of like who's the high risk, who's the high harm, who do we need to go and see. From that visit, we may do what we call a kind of an urgent visit, if you like, where we'll go and see that sponsor within 9 days of that tasking drop-in. But at the moment, BAU visits around about 3 to 4 weeks. So from a piece of information coming in to a visit being conducted, if it's business as usual, you know, there's no high harm, high risk posed, it's a compliance issue, then that timescale is about 3 to 4 weeks. Once that visit's conducted, the compliance officers obviously gather the evidence. They look at the 5 areas at present of what the sponsorship obligations are. They make a recommendation, and that gets passed back to a complex caseworking team, again, of around about 25 staff. And they will then work through that visit report, all the evidence that gathered, and they'll make that decision on whether or not to suspend that sponsor, action plan that sponsor, maintain or move to a suspension. And obviously at that point, the sponsor has 20 days to provide us with evidence to support or rebut the reasons for suspension. And following that 20 days, if we're still not satisfied, that's when that complex casework team will move to a revocation of that sponsor's license. So that's the kind of teams and how we're currently operating and kind of what our priorities are at the moment and what our sort of figures and resources are at the moment. So unless there's anything on that, I'll kind of move on to the questions that Lee sent me this morning, and hopefully that'll fill in a bit of detail on the kind of particularly the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, which has seen quite a lot of compliance activity. So the first one is how much has in-person compliance visits increased? I don't think, to be honest, well, I know that they haven't, the in-person visits haven't really increased. We've been running it around 50 visits a week, 35 to 50 visits a week nationally take place. But what we have seen is the generic increase in compliance activity is generally down to we are being more robust in our use of where we've got straight to revoke breaches. So the non-complex team, I think, accounted for about 60% of all our revocations last year. So 2023, we had 350-ish revocations. 2024, we had 1,550 revocations. So there's been a clear increase, which might give the impression we're doing more visits, but what we've seen is we're doing more use of our straight to revoke powers around fraudulent docs, around dishonesty, about where we've got those C1 breaches are evident from the material we've got in front of us. There's no need to conduct a further investigation. There's no need to carry out a visit. Those cases are going straight to revoke. So we've seen a big increase in that. We've also seen a big increase in cases where we've gone straight to suspend because what we can see in front of us, and then we just never hear from that sponsor again. So then they quite naturally then go into straight to revoke cases. And we've also seen, to be honest, an increase in just some really bad sponsors, which they've kind of in effect used the system to the point where they've been suspended, and at that point they've just got no interest in any further litigation. They've used the system for what they wanted for, which was generally high cos use, and they'll just kind of like carry on until they get caught, and then they'll sort of walk away at that point. So it's a mix of quicker, I think, less resource intensive use of the guidance powers we've always had around straight to revoke, a mix of kind of like quite a lot of poor sponsors who were on the register and had no interest in getting involved in litigation with us, that has led to that kind of like increase in the numbers. So I can't take credit for it all. Some of it is because the sponsors were just that bad, particularly in the care sector. We kind of all know what went on there. And that, there were a lot of bad sponsors in particular in that sector. So the issue about, do you get a remote visit or an in-person visit? Pre-license checks are done by another team, and I think it's about 12 months ago, they moved to wherever they could to do a digital audit of pre-license sponsors. That allowed me to free up my resources to go and do more post-license work, which is a visit to a pre-licensed sponsor is a little bit anachronistic because you're very limited in your questions. You're asking them, what would we do if we gave you a license? And it's very difficult to argue or provide evidence for that, because it's kind of, can't remember what the word is I'm looking for, but it's kind of, it's what will you do if we give you one, which is it's a kind of much lighter question than we gave you a license and this is what you've done. So for me, pre-license visits I think the default setting now is that they will be digital. Now, the guidance changed 9th of April, which now allows us to do a thing called directed compliance, where previously and this is a culture change, I think, for everyone, is previously the default setting was we would always go out and do a visit and ask questions in all 5 areas. But what we're kind of moving to now is that the question will be, can we do a digital visit? And if possible, that is what we'll do. And do we need to look at all 5 areas of compliance and do a full met, not met report? Where we conduct a visit, either be it physical or digital, if we come across a situation where either the intelligence indicates there's a we will revoke breach, and then we confirm that through either a digital or a physical visit, we can now stop the visit at that point. We don't have to go through a full 5 area visit. So that's obviously a resource implication for me and right throughout our teams, because what we've seen is if we ask questions on 5 areas and we suspend on 3 areas, then we have to, deal with representations on those 3 areas. Whereas if we go out to see a sponsor and there's an evident and clear we will revoke breach, then we will just revoke on those grounds now. And again, that's about greater use of the guidance powers that we've always had. So the fact if you get a physical or a digital visit doesn't reflect on the reasons for the visit. Some of it will be down to resources. It's not to say if you're getting a digital visit, it means you're kind of okay and we're just checking, or it doesn't mean that you're going to get, it's got to be a revocation because they've got a serious ground. So I think the default setting will change to digital visits, but there will always be a need in complex cases and with certain types of sponsors and certain types of referrals and intel where we'll need to do a physical visit. And likewise, just because we've got that ability now to just concentrate on the we will revoke areas, certainly doesn't mean that that's what we will always be doing. There will always be a need to go out and do a full audit on sponsors. And in terms of directed compliance, we're just putting the first kind of like 10 and 20 cases through. Obviously, the guidance has recently changed, so we're just putting those first 10 and 20 test cases through to see kind of how it works for us and sort of how it works for the sponsors, just to make sure we're getting kind of a true reflection of outcomes that we would have done were we going to be doing a full 5 area visit. So that's the kind of compliance landscape we're moving to. There'll be more digital visits and there'll be more kind of like focused visits around what is the issue with that sponsor, rather than the full kind of like 5 area, some of it quite generic and not relevant questions that we were asking, and likewise the evidence that we were gathering. Any potential breach or failure that a sponsor comes across, it is far better that they report that to us than we are told about it from elsewhere, or that we find it as part of another compliance process. So I think the sponsors, I think SMS is probably the way to do it, or any of the usual kind of post-license team email addresses that sponsors have for when if they're requesting more COS. Then I think certainly any issues with the process, it does happen. People forget passwords, people get locked out, key personnel, authorizing officers, level 1 users move on, and new people come in. We completely get it, and we'll always be we'll be pragmatic about it. So it is always better to tell us about it rather than us find out about it, because obviously what we don't want is we turn up somewhere and there's been something going on, there's been something wrong, and it's been like that for 12 months, and it affects multiple workers, and kind of like it's never been reported to us. So that would fall under a problem under general sponsorship duties, which includes that kind of like keeping the Home Office updated, making sure your systems are accurate. So yeah, always kind of like come into us and give us an outline of what's happened, and obviously that'll just be treated like a referral, and we'll go through that tasking process, and hopefully it'll be a case of like, no, there's no further action, there's been an issue, the sponsors addressed it, and they're not a high risk, high harm sponsor, so we'll just keep that on file in the kind of like, we'll just keep a record of that against the sponsors' details. So what we've got in terms of, it's like I said, really, in terms of who actually gets a visit, it doesn't make any difference as to how long they've been on the register, what size of company they are, what profile company they are. We do suspend and investigate and action plan, big sponsors, high profile sponsors. So it's all around. I think the takeaway is if we get adverse information, we will look at that, we'll investigate that. I think 2023-22, we looked at about 300 sponsors. Last year we looked at 10,000. Now, not all that 10,000 went through to be compliance cases. Probably about 3,000 of them did, I would think. The rest of them, again, it's just that assurance. So we've looked at this sponsor, we've checked them, we've no need to progress this any further for now. Lee, have you appeared because I'm running out of time?
You have read my mind, Andy. Yeah. So,
Yes.
Andy, there's one extra question in the Q&A, but we will send that afterwards. So we will share
Okay.
that with you. It was in relation to more sponsor license refusals. But yeah, have a think about an answer for that one, and we can go back in writing to this group. But Andy, that was superb, mate, and yeah, hopefully you found that useful, folks. And again, you know, if you do have any further questions for Andy in relation to sponsorship compliance, I'm sure Andy would be happy to help. But yeah, share them with and we can certainly come back to you. Michelle, or I don't know if it's going to be who else was going to at this point, but yeah, hopefully that's been useful. I know we've covered quite a lot there, but yeah, we're happy to provide anything else in writing to you good folk.
Fantastic. Well, a massive thank you, Lee, Aaron, and Andy, for your time today. Really, really informative. And yes, if there are any further questions, please just pop them in the Q&A, and Lee and the team will look to get back to us with some written responses in relation to those. So yeah, a massive thank you for your attendance here today, and hopefully everyone found that as informative as I did. So
yeah,
thank
enjoy
you.
the rest of your session, folks. And Michelle, good to see you again, and Robin and others, Sue and everybody else. Yeah, really good to see you all. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the nice weather, folks, and we'll maybe see you soon.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining. It's great to see so many of you on the call. Just very briefly, my name is Michelle, and I'm a director in the immigration team at Forvis Mazars. We've obviously gone immigration heavy for the last 50 minutes or so. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to have a conversation with Robin, because there are some quite significant changes, I think, in the taxation for people coming into the UK. Robin, do you like to kind of chat through what those are?
Yeah, of course, Michelle. So firstly, introduction to myself. I'm a director in the Global Mobility Solutions team here at Forvis Mazars, and I work with Michelle very closely. So what are the main changes? So from the 6th of April 2025, the concepts of domicile and the remittance basis for non-domiciled individuals, they were replaced by what we call the Foreign Income and Gains Regime, or shorthand, the FIG regime. So under the FIG regime, when employees move to the UK from overseas, their liability to UK tax on their foreign income and gains is going to be determined by their resident status prior to their arrival in the UK, rather than by their domicile. So unlike the old remittance basis rules, under the FIG regime, employees can remit as much of their foreign income and gains as they would like without this impacting their liability to UK tax on this income.
Excellent. So how does the FIG regime work then, Robin?
Well, under this regime, when an employee moves to the UK, they can make a claim to exempt their foreign income and gains from UK tax for the first 4 tax years they're resident in the UK. But there are 2 conditions on that. They need to make sure they've not been, they need to be not tax resident in the UK in the 10 UK tax years prior to the first tax year they became resident in the UK when they arrive here. And they make a FIG claim on their UK tax return that includes details of all of their foreign income and gains they received in that tax year.
So does that apply to employment income as well?
That's correct, Michelle. It does, but it's provided under a separate relief and a separate part of the legislation. So it applies provided the employee qualifies for the FIG regime, and the relief on employment income is known as something called Overseas Workday Relief, or shorthand OWR. So the concept of Overseas Workday Relief has been amended so it applies to the first 4 tax years and employees resident in the UK as opposed to 3 tax years under the old remittance basis rules. So the relief applies to employees' employment income related to their non-UK workdays, but it is subject to an annual cap. It's a limitation, and it's set at the lower of 300,000 and 30% of the employee's net taxable earnings. Now, one of the quirks of this rule is that this financial limit applies on a cumulative basis, which means that when we look at bonuses and share-based payments that may relate to an earlier tax year, but are paid in a later tax year, that needs to be tested against the limit for the earlier year. So as you can imagine, having to track that is going to be quite challenging. Now, employers should note that this relief can also be obtained at a payroll level if they obtain something called a Section 690 direction from HMRC. And this has now been streamlined so that this application can be obtained online, so that employers, once they get this direction, they're authorised to only apply PAYE income tax via the payroll on the employee's earnings that relate to their UK workdays. So the bit of that employment income that relates to their non-UK workdays subject to the limit would fall outside the scope of UK tax. Alternatively, if the employee is tax equalised and the employer operates something called an Appendix 6 shadow modified payroll, that relief can be applied at a payroll level without the Section 690 direction.
Okay, that's quite a lot of information. So what other changes do employers and employees then need to be aware of that are connected to these recent changes in the tax rules?
And I think you summarised that well, Michelle. That is a lot of information. And I got tongue-tied. So it's impossible to cover all of the changes today, but I think there are 2 points that jump out to me. Now, firstly, under some transitional rules, employees that came to the UK in the 22-23 tax year and claimed overseas workday relief and the remittance basis, they're not going to be entitled to overseas workday relief in the 25-26 tax year. Now, this could lead to some very odd situations where an employee could get relief on their foreign income and gains in the 25-26 tax year on their non-employment income, but then not be entitled to overseas workday relief on their employment income that relates to their non-UK workdays in that year. So that's a bit of a quirk. The second point is that home leave tax relief for the employee's qualifying travel expenses has been amended so that for UK residents, when they come to the UK, the period that this relief can be claimed will match the number of years that they can claim overseas workday relief for. Now, what does this mean in plain English? It means that the relief can be claimed for a maximum of 4 years as opposed to 5 years under the old rules. And this could result in an additional tax bill for employers who reimburse employees for their travel costs between the UK and their country of origin, and the employer tax equalises the employee's earnings, i.e. they pay the taxes on their behalf.
Okay, so there's definitely quite a lot to consider there. So what actions should employers be taking to deal with these changes?
So I think there are 5 simple steps. So the first one is I'd identify the employees that are impacted by the FIG regime and the new OWR rules. Consider funding and providing advice to these employees because they're going to be confused. Budget for any added tax equalisation gross up costs that may arise from the overseas workday relief limitation for tax equalised employees, and also the restriction to home leave relief. Employers should also update their policies, processes, and their tax cost estimator calculators to factor in the changes. And finally, as I said previously, they're going to have to account for, employers and their accountants, the overseas workday relief restriction limitation on trailing bonuses and share-based income.
Right, thanks, Robin. So what other issues do employers need to think about in the coming months in respect of these employees that have come to work in the UK?
Okay, so we're going to park the foreign income and gains regime now, and we're going to talk about business travellers. So where you're a UK employer and you host a business travellers who are not resident in the UK, if the employer has an Appendix 4 agreement in place with HMRC, then they need to report those business travellers that they've hosted in the UK in the UK tax year ended 5th of April 2025 to HM Revenue and Customs by the 31st of May. However, we may have some cases here where employers don't have one of these agreements in place with HMRC. Now, where that is the case, employers should speak to their tax advisor to discuss their options to regularise their PAYE reporting obligations for these business travellers, as what we often find, if there is an employment tax review by HMRC into this, it's something that they often will pick up. They'll ask the question, do you host short-term business visitors? And do you have an Appendix 4 agreement in place? So definitely something to look at. Now, even if employers do have one of these Appendix 4 agreements in place, they do need to take care who can be included in the agreement. So who can't be included? So if it's employees who are not resident in the country that the UK doesn't have a double taxation agreement, they can't be included. Nor can employees who are employed by a non-UK branch of their UK employer. Now, for these categories of employees, it is possible to obtain something called an Appendix 8 agreement from HMRC to pay the taxes for these employees at year end in one payroll submission by the 31st of May. But you do need to obtain that agreement. So if you haven't got one for 24-25, you've missed the boat. It will be for next year, and you need to speak to your advisor on how to make good the tax for those people.
Brilliant. And what about non-resident directors? Are they covered by the Appendix 4 scheme?
Unfortunately, they're not, Michelle. So for those individuals, the default position is that payroll PAYE income tax should be applied to their earnings from day one via a payroll. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but I don't think it's appropriate, or I don't think we have the time either, to cover them today as well. But as with short-term business visitors, when you're looking at non-resident directors as an employer, we recommend that you do put in place a process and policy to track them, determine the PAYE obligations you've got for those non-resident directors on their earnings, and take advice from an accountant or advisor to ensure that these obligations are fulfilled.
Well, thanks, Robin. I mean, that's definitely a lot to consider, and I'm pretty sure you could talk about this for quite a long time.
I could, I could, Michelle. But given time constraints and for the avoidance of turning into tax techie world, I could talk about national insurance for short-term business visitors and non-resident directors, but I don't think it's going to be beneficial to do that. But what I think it would be good to do, as we're talking about business visitors and non-resident directors, if you could just touch on briefly the immigration considerations for those individuals, because I know there are permitted activities that they can do in the UK and activities that they're not allowed to do. And what I often see is when we talk to employers, when we talk about tax and immigration, when we talk about business visitors, the rules are different for tax and immigration. So some care is needed here. So I'm now going to hand to you, Michelle, to just talk about the immigration side in a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, activities, what you're going to be doing in the UK is going to be the driving force behind whether it's something that you are able to do as a visitor or whether it's something that is going to require a different kind of visa, such as a sponsored work permit. Now, over the years, the Home Office have made many changes to the business visitor rules in an attempt to simplify them. And what you'll find is individuals coming in, say, for general business meetings or board meetings potentially, would quite happily meet the business visitor criteria. But it's when their activities potentially go beyond that scope. So are they going to be coming in? Are they going to be negotiating or signing contracts on behalf of the UK entity? Are they going to be receiving any payment for the work that they're going to be doing here? Are they going to be travelling backwards and forwards to the UK on such a frequent basis that the level of risk every time they enter the UK increases. So it's really, really important from an immigration perspective to understand what it is that the individual is going to be doing, how long they're going to be doing it for, and how frequently they're coming into the UK, and to conduct that assessment to determine, do they fit quite nicely within the business visitor requirements, or are we going to have to potentially look at whether an alternative visa route would be or maintain less risk for the organisation.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Now, we covered a lot in the first part of today's discussion with the Home Office, and I'm just conscious of thinking about what that means for employers and the key takeaways employers should consider. So, Michelle, if you start on your side, and then I'll come on to the tax briefly again.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there was quite a lot of information that the Home Office provided, obviously touching on three of the areas where we've seen the biggest amount of change recently. So I think for me, you know, there is change. There's been change. There's going to continue to be change. So one of the biggest things for me, I think, is being flexible. So making sure that your policies, your procedures are being able to react and incorporate these changes. So when we look at things like the introduction of the ETA for inbound visitors to the UK, you know, are you making individuals aware of that requirement? Has there been briefings? When we look at the continued march for digitalisation, having your evidence of your right to stay in the UK being available online only, you know, are your right to work processes changing to be able to accommodate those online right to work checks? And we're going to see those changes where they phase out those physical entry vignettes. So effectively, you know, removing the need for potentially a manual check when somebody first starts. We're also going to see the immigration white paper coming out in the next couple of months. I know there isn't a lot of information around that. I'm hearing rumours that there is potentially going to be fundamental change. So you will have seen immigration, huge topic in the press always, but a real focus on publishing those the bad employers. So as Andy was talking about, the sponsor compliance piece is really massive, and we're just going to see increasing numbers of visits. You know, the figures he was talking about, the massive jump between I think it was, you know, 250 license revocations in 250 license revocations in 2023, and in 2024 already, you know, it's 1,500. So we're seeing a massive increase in how the Home Office are applying the lens of sponsor compliance. So I think for me as well, having that flexibility to be able to change those processes, but also now a really good time to kind of look at what you're doing within the business, making sure that your HR processes and procedures, your policies within the 5 key areas that the Home Office look at, which is typically maintaining contact details, being able to report absences and other changes to an individual's job role, how you maintain your recruitment information. It's a really good time to kind of maybe pressure test where those systems are, particularly now because there isn't a 4-year touching point for sponsor license renewals. The Home Office kind of extended the validity period for sponsor licenses, so there's no longer this enforced touch point, you know, to make sponsors or employers think about these things. So I think that's the key things for me, is being flexible enough to accommodate the changes that have happened, are happening, and will happen, and also, you know, really making sure with the focus there is on compliance and the increasing number of visits and, you know, horrifically the license revocations, just, you know, being confident that you're able to meet those sponsor compliance processes and requirements as robustly as possible.
Thanks for that, Michelle. I spoke for quite a long amount of time about tax changes and rules, so I'm going to keep my synopsis and summary quite brief. So when we're looking at the new FIG regime and the revised overseas workday relief, I think there are 3 key points for employers to consider. Firstly, identify existing and future employees that are going to be impacted by these regimes. Consider how the regimes could be used to attract expatriates and UK nationals currently living overseas to work in the UK, and update your policies and processes and budget for any additional tax equalisation gross-up costs that may arise from either the financial limitation we discussed on OWR or the restriction on home leave relief. Turning very briefly to short-term business visitors and non-resident directors, you just need to make sure that you identify those impacted individuals, ensure that you understand the rules, and also that you have policies and processes in place to ensure that you adhere to the PAYE compliance obligations related to those individuals. So I think that's everything that we've covered now. I think it's just a case now, Michelle, of just answering any questions that have come up in the chat on here. Maybe if you start, Michelle, on the immigration side, and then I'll go to the tax side. There's only, I think, 1 tax question. I think the bulk of them are immigration. So if you start, and I'll do the tax question at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, I will say the first 2 immigration questions, Lee and his team have confirmed that they are going to provide a written response to. So if there are any more questions around the Home Office presentation, then please do feel free to continue to add them to the question and answer tab, and we'll get those confirmed for you as quickly as possible. I think the one question on here was the changes. There's changes to remote or hybrid working policies. So how are they affecting the immigration compliance for inbound expatriates? So yeah, there's some, you know, we are always being asked about remote working. It's definitely something that we see most of our clients that now have a defined remote working policy. Obviously, it can be very, very difficult to manage your staff if they are located in various far-flung pockets of the world. So I think the first step is definitely make sure that you do have a policy and that it's as defined as possible. When you're looking at you know, upholding immigration compliance for the UK and for everywhere else, it's really important to understand, you know, what are they going to be doing while they're there, and you know, what activities can they undertake. There are a large number of countries that do have digital nomad programs, so sometimes those are the least riskiest routes to follow, but I would definitely suggest that when you've got somebody potentially asking, can I go and work in Spain for a couple of weeks, that's definitely something that needs to be looked at. So having a defined policy is really important, because that then allows you to set those parameters so that you can then manage or better manage the immigration compliance or minimize any potential immigration risk, not just in the UK, but outbound as well. And outbound seems to be where we get the vast majority of our questions at the moment. So hopefully I've answered that okay, but if there is any follow-up, let me know.
Thanks, Michelle. I think there's just one question, which I'll just read out. So with adjustments to tax legislation, what are the key considerations employers should factor into relocation packages for inbound expatriates? I think to answer this question, I think you've got to contextualize it first. So when we talk about relocation packages, I think probably what the person that's asking the question is referring to first, they're looking at some special rules for relocation expenses. So where people come to the UK and they change their main residence where they live, an employer can pay for or reimburse them tax-free for up to the first £8,000 of qualifying relocation expenses. So this covers things like moving goods, household goods, to the United Kingdom. However, when you look at the changes to tax legislation under the FIG and OWR regime, because the way that the reliefs work, I don't see that impacting that relief at all. However, what we do need to think about is home leave relief. So home leave relief covers things like flights to the UK and flights back to the individual's country of origin, but it also covers visas as well, so visa costs. So what you can do as an employer is you can maximize the relief you get for relocation costs if you use that separate relief under a separate provision of the legislation to cover things like that travel cost to the UK and those visa costs. But you just need to be conscious that under the new rules, where somebody comes to the UK now, that relief is only going to apply up to a maximum of the first 4 tax years they are resident in the UK. Under the old rules, that could be up to 5 years. So you just need to be conscious and cautious with the new rules, because it may become more costly if you reimburse those expenses beyond 4 tax years these days. So that's it really. That's all I have on my side. So I'm going to pass back now to Sue to wrap up, if that's okay.
Thanks, Robin. I think we've got just one more immigration question, Michelle, if you don't mind. What are the implications for dependents relocating with expats under the new immigration framework?
Okay, so we saw last year a retraction in certain schemes' abilities to bring dependents with them. So this was focused predominantly on students coming into the UK, and also in the health and care sector, because unfortunately those were the areas where there were large, or seemed to be large, number of dependents coming in. Now, currently, under our skilled worker routes, you know, under the global and business mobility, under the global talent visa, under many of our routes, it is absolutely still possible to bring dependents. And we are hoping that that is not going to change. So hopefully something the white paper will address is this in a little bit more issue. But there is unfortunately the potential for us to consider that if they've restricted dependence on other immigration routes, they could look to restrict dependence on more immigration routes moving forward. It's really, really important to remember in all of the communications that I've had with the Home Office, they've always stressed that the main aim is to reduce net migration, and unfortunately dependence is a really good way of being able to do that. There are obviously implications on what that means. If you can't bring your family with you, are you going to want to move to the UK or stay here on a long-term basis? Does it become less attractive for our, you know, the overseas talent? Does it make it more difficult for employers to retain talent? Yes, potentially. But I think this is something that hopefully will be addressed further in the white paper. And there'll be some recourse, hopefully, for employers, for sponsors, for individuals to give the Home Office their thoughts on what these changes might do and the impact of what those changes could actually be.
Thanks, Michelle. I think that might be the last of the questions. So a huge thank you, obviously, to the Home Office, to Lee, Aaron and Andrew, Michelle, to you and Robin as well, and Jordan and Beth for their support today. Please keep the questions coming. If you want to discuss anything that has been talked about today, then feel free to get in touch with myself or Michelle or Robin. And of course, thank you to everyone for listening and attending today.